This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Watchers over Manhattan. That's straight ahead on A View from the Bunker. Prepare for spiritual war by arming yourself with information. Take advantage of these specials through March that dig deep into the Bible to help you make sense of the chaos around us. First, our Veneration Bundle, our 2 co-authored books plus the travelogue DVDs from our Israel tours. An $85 value, just $45 plus shipping and handling. The Second Coming of Saturn Bundle, featuring my book and the 13-part companion DVD, a $50 value for just $35 plus shipping and handling. The This Is War special offer, featuring the Second Coming of Saturn, 4 DVDs, and 7 hours of audio interviews with Bible scholar Dr. Michael Heiser, a $145 value for just $75 plus shipping and handling. And the Gilbert Fiction Collection, all 8 novels in Sharon's Red Wing Saga series plus my 2 novels, a $200 value for just $140 plus shipping and handling. These offers are available through March only at our online store, gilberthouse.org/store. And again, we thank you for your prayers and support. Watchers overlooking the Flatiron District of New York City, the Manhattan borough to be precise. Why are they there? Or at least one specifically. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. We're going to talk about that tonight. A new piece of artwork that is supposed to represent women's empowerment or something, but it actually looks like it represents something a whole lot different, something supernatural, actually. And joining us to talk about this is kind of our go-to guy when it comes to semiotics, looking at symbolism embedded in the art and architecture of the world around us, and also the world of entertainment and music. He is the author of the book, Our Gods Wear Spandex, The Secret History of Comic Book Heroes. He blogs at secretsun.blogspot.com and is the proprietor of a place where you can dig deeper into subjects like this, the Secret Sun Institute of Advanced Synchromysticism. And we'll have him talk about that before the end of the program. We welcome back to the bunker Christopher Knowles. So, Chris, this 8-foot statue of a woman with ram's horns shows up on a New York City courthouse, and this is supposed to represent women's empowerment. It's a tribute to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg or something. It's got her lace on there and everything, so I guess that's true. We didn't buy it. I saw you didn't buy it either. That's why I had to have you back on. What was your reaction when you saw that thing?
It's just, I don't know if it's desperation or impunity, but this stuff is just getting more and more in your face all the time. And that's a perfect example of it. Because there are so many, when you break that down and you look at that character, I have Knowles's laws. And the first law, I think all 3 laws apply here. The first one is whenever there's a controversy about symbolism in the media, it's usually disguising a different symbolic message altogether. So we see that where it's like, oh, it's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That's the cover. That's the cover story, right? That's so you can't criticize it. That's that's how they insulate it, right? But the second Knowles law, is that the old cults of state will be reinstated under the cover of woke. So in other words, wokeness is being used to reintroduce, these old gods from the ancient world. So we see elements of Inanna and Kadesh and, all these in that family, Ishtar, Astarte, all these figures, right? But there's also that weird, it's chimeric, and we see a lot of these chimeric forms, right? But it's also, I think most people look at it and go, that's demonic. Even without the hair done sort of the ram's horns, and the hair almost reminds me a lot of Tanit, right? So Tanit, the consort of Baal, who the Carthaginians made sacrifices to,
right?
With the Tophits, right? They would sacrifice their children. So there are all these elements embedded into that. But just consider what this is. So this is a appellate courthouse, right? This is part of the Supreme Court system in New York, right? State of New York. this is as official as it gets. You know what I mean? So when a symbol like this is seen on a building like that, it's making a deliberate statement. It's making to me, a very dark statement, because I do see that figure as demonic, I mean, but the neighborhood itself, Madison Square, is something that I've been looking at for like 13 years now, because back in 2010, there was this art exhibit, quote unquote art exhibit, that they're always art exhibits, right? Mm-hmm. Called Event Horizon. And basically what it was is all these like naked male statues, featureless, that looked like they had like wings broken off, right? So they look like angels with their wings torn off, right? And they were placed on the tops of buildings all around Madison Square. They were on sidewalks. I mean, there were several of these figures. And, even back then, I was like, that's the Watchers. This is Watcher adoration. And it's something that I didn't really have a strong sense of back then. Like, I didn't really understand the phenomenon of Watcher worship that really only in the past few years I've really come to see as a thing, right? But when you look at this, you can go back online, go to Google, whatever, and just look at this. And it's very clearly like Watchers, because they're watching over the street. They're standing at the ledges of buildings and so on. And there was also, so that was 2010. And then in that same neighborhood, Madison Square, there was this display, again, another art exhibit, right, called Whiteout. And it was basically these like white orbs that they had hovering over the entire park, right? And it was incredibly sinister. And, the interesting thing about this, too, is that this is a block away from the Grand Lodge in New York, the Grand Lodge, the Masonic Lodge. And this Event Horizon display, when it was displayed in London, was also right in the vicinity of a Grand Lodge. So there's obviously some sort of connection there between this exhibit, or this ritual adoration, I think is more accurate, and Freemasonry. I don't know what it is exactly, but there you go. So there's a background that I've been, and I know that neighborhood really well because I used to work for Toy Biz, right? And Toy Biz had their showroom like right across the street from Madison Square. So and I used to work in the Empire State Building for a number of years. I used to walk, when I used to walk downtown, I would walk through that neighborhood. So it's a very potent neighborhood in some ways, like symbolically, ritualistically. So when they put a statue like that I think, even the normiest normie would look at that and say, there's just something amiss there. There's something off, this golden idol placed on top of, this building when you have all these historical lawgivers. That's sort of the theme of the other statuary there.
Moses and Zoroaster and so on. Yeah.
Exactly.
Confucius.
Like Moses. Yeah, exactly. And they're all in, marble or alabaster. And then there's this golden figure. It draws attention to itself. But it's in the context, and I posted on this today on my blog, that we're seeing these demonic, like explicitly demonic statues being installed in London, Rome, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Athens. This has been going on for about 5 or 6 years now. And to me, it's obviously making a statement. Like, for instance, back in 2018, just before the Met Gala, talking about Anana, right? The gala, right? Right. They put this hideous demonic statue on the roof of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it's just the most repulsive thing you've ever seen. It's this like alien with, quote unquote alien, but it's clearly a demon. And it has like the triple, of Hecate, the 3 faces.
Right.
And then it has another giant figure bowing to it, like in like a robe. So it's like clearly a supplicant. So it's demonic worship. Like, there's no reasonable person could look at that image. It's called "We Come in Peace." The name of the artist is Huma Ababa. Nobody could look at that imagery and think this is not explicit demonic worship. And it's in your face. It's all over the world now. And it seems to be like these temporary installations, but they're always very well publicized. And like I said, so in this case, we're seeing not only the symbolic messages being mixed up, but we're also seeing wokeness being used as cover, right, for what is to most people looks clearly demonic. And it's kind of replacing like one of these older statues. So it literally is like Knowles's laws so far, all in one, and it's disorienting.
So the art is being used to sell a certain message that those who are in charge of these types of installations are sort of signaling what they're trying to invoke or impose, well, or both.
It's like planting your flag, when you conquer territory, you plant your flag there, right? And that's how I see these things.
Now, some of these installations are moving, because this is a temporary installation. This statue, which is called Now, Sharon pointed out to say, oh yeah, National Organization of Women, Equal Rights Amendment, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I say, okay, yeah, I get that. But it's, I guess this summer they're going to move it to Houston, just as they've moved the Triumphal Arch from Palmyra, which was the arch that led to the Temple of Baal, or Baal for scholars out there. They set up replicas of that in New York, in London, and elsewhere. Washington, D.C. They kind of moved it around.
It's funny you should mention that, because this image, this very explicitly demonic image that was on the roof of the Metropolitan Museum is now on the Washington Mall.
Okay.
Where they also had the Palmyra Arch, right? So, yeah, I mean, I've been watching this stuff for a while, and it's just very clear. The thing that really flipped me out, too, I don't know if you saw this, but outside of San Francisco City Hall, there's allegedly, it's supposed to be Ashurbanipal, the Assyrian king.
Right.
Like, first of all, why is he there? But it's done up precisely in the same imagery that they would depict Gilgamesh.
Okay.
In the ancient Babylonian Mesopotamian world, right? But that infers Nimrod, right? So there's always been the association with Gilgamesh and Nimrod. So I mean, this is what I'm saying. And there's also the Babylon Gate in the lobby, the courtyard of Hollywood and Highland, which is where the Oscars are held every year.
Right, sure.
So if you go back there, you see it's like, I think it's Nisroch and Asher on this giant gate that is allegedly based on the gate in Intolerance, the D.W. Griffith film. So there's always a cover story.
Yeah, which we actually watched. It's available to stream now on and the only thing I'd known about D.W. Griffiths was he made that Ku Klux Klan movie. Was it Birth of a Nation? But found out that this movie Intolerance was considered a masterpiece by film critics. And when you look at what he did at that early date, I mean, my gosh, that's like a 30-story replica of the gates of Babylon that he built more than 100 years ago in Hollywood. Yeah. Like, okay, interesting.
Yeah. That was before the unions took over Los Angeles, right? They took over the film industry. But what does it do in there now? Like, what does it have to do with anything now?
Why'd they leave it?
And the interesting thing is that, so the building that became the Kodak Theater, I think they call it something else now, but that was originally the Grand Lodge of California, right? And then it moved across the street, and that's where Jimmy Kimmel does his show. Like, Jimmy Kimmel literally does his television program in the Grand Lodge of California, which is right across the street. So you see what I'm saying? So it's just like,
nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Yeah, are you sensing a pattern here? Like there's a bit of a through line going on here, I think.
Madison Square. Am I right in assuming that that's where Madison Square Garden is located?
No.
Okay.
Well, that's an interesting story. So it was back in the day, but they moved it to 33rd Street, of course. Right? It goes from 23rd to 33rd, right? It's a promotion. It's
moved up a few degrees. Yeah.
But they tore down the original Penn Station, which New Yorkers are still furious about because it was a beautiful building. There were two buildings that were like basically twins, and one was the original Penn Station, and the other one was the New York Post Office. And I think, as far as I know, they've converted the post office back into Penn Station, because Penn Station and Madison Square Garden, as they were built, it looks like a toilet bowl. And it's just the worst architecture. It's that brutalist crap that was popular in the 50s and 60s. Ugly as sin. But it was where Madison Square Garden was back in the day, and then they moved it to, like I said, to 33rd Street.
Okay, so Madison Square Park there at Madison and 23rd. I'm looking at an overhead map. Just curious about that, because one of the things that kind of surprised me as I was researching the cult of the Nephilim, the Rephaim, in the Old Testament period, was the way the concept of the garden developed. The garden is the word in Hebrew is gan, which is a cognate for a word in Akkadian that is in turn a cognate for a word in an early Persian dialect. And that word is paradisa, where we get the word paradise.
Well, wouldn't Akkadian predate Persian?
Yeah, like I said, this is like an Avestan or some early dialect. I mean, well before there were such a thing as Persians. I mean, the Elamites occupied that territory back in the day. But the word, as it was translated later into what became Persian, the earliest form of it, I'd have to look up the research on it, because it's etymology is not my strength. That's really Sharon's bailiwick. But paradisa, which of course is where we get the Greek word from which we get paradise. But the idea was a ramparted garden, like an enclosure that was reserved for the king, hence the Garden of Eden. But it was transformed in by the Amorites, who took over Mesopotamia around 2000 BC or thereabouts, from 2000 BC to 1500 BC. They kind of dominated the lands of the Bible. And the garden was where the king was buried, and you offered sacrifices to him twice a month so that his spirit could join the council of the Rephaim or something in the afterlife, which is why it was such a big thing in the Old Testament. If you notice, the kings of Judah were all buried in the tombs of their fathers until you get to the son of Hezekiah, Manasseh, who was known for sacrificing his children to Molech, who's just another name for Baal Haman, the Phoenician husband of Tanit. That's right. And he was buried in the king's garden, as was his son Ammon, who also sacrificed children to Molech. So the whole idea of this area of the Madison Square and the Madison Square Garden, or the Madison Square Park now, having such a concentration of these statues, summoning or evoking these old gods, the Watchers, is really interesting.
Well, also, too, is that it's 23rd Street and this is 2023. So it just seems to me that, I understand how OCD these people tend to get with the symbolism, and everything has to kind of line up. So I don't think that's coincidental.
We actually rented a house once in a small town in Indiana where the street number, I history nerd, so I was like doing research, genealogy research, history of the town, just to learn more about the town. And the street number of the house we bought, or rented rather, was originally 310. Now, the guy that we rented it from was a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, member of the Shriners. He, after he bought it, had it changed to 312, so it was 312 or 33. Seriously.
It's OCD, man.
Yeah.
It's neurotic, It's neurosis elevated to religion.
We've seen this in other ways too, though. When we were in Colombia back in 2006, there were a group of Buddhist monks who came through Colombia, and of course that's college town, University of Missouri's there. And they did a mandala, sand mandala, which is that beautiful artwork that they do. And of course, when they're all done with it, then they just essentially they destroy it. They sweep it all up and sweep the sand into a local body of water. Well, they swept it into a branch of the river that fed into the Missouri. And everybody in town was like, "Oh, this is so beautiful. This is wonderful." I had just interviewed Peter Levenda and had read some of the stuff that he'd written about the apocalyptic beliefs, the apocalyptic eschatology of some of the tantric Buddhists, and how it's a lot more violent than most of us would assume of Buddhists. And that when they do this with these mandalas, it's actually a summoning of their gods. And then by sweeping the sand into the waterway, they're essentially basically saying, okay, now this body of water belongs to you. So this appears to be almost an ongoing magical working of some sort.
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, it's so complex and it's so far-reaching. And I'm not even sure, I don't necessarily believe that it's all just like one big group that's orchestrating it all. I think there are a lot of different sects and cults sort of all putting their own spin on it. And that's why we see, like I said, all these big demon statues. It almost seems like this is like a competition among some of these groups to, create the most grotesque looking demons, to basically cast spells on people. But, so much public art since the post-war period has basically been psychological warfare. And I also think that spellcraft is also a form of psychological warfare. And it gets to the point in many ways when you start to look at how esoteric a lot of these intelligence groups can get, particularly like these sort of black groups within these groups, these agencies. It gets very hard to sort of parse out what is psyop and what's spellcraft. But to me, like, I just start to see all of it in the aggregate, like is gestalt as spell work. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I really studied, like I learned about how this stuff really works and has worked throughout history, because there's all this kind of like Harry Potter stuff, and you wave a wand around and like this happens and this pops out of nowhere, and it's like that's just fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that was I'll tell you what was the real turning point for me, and people who follow me are probably sick of this story already. But I was reading an interview or a story in Rolling Stone about Augustus Bear Owsley, who was the Grateful Dead's acid cook, right? But he got involved in the Dead when they were called the Warlocks of all things, right? And but it was because the Warlocks were the house band for Ken Kesey's acid tests. And Ken Kesey's acid tests were just basically field testing of MK Ultra techniques, straight up and down. And there's this story that Owsley told where he was watching all this go down, and he couldn't take it. And he went out to the car and was just was kind of like freaking out and trying to catch his breath. And Ken Kesey came out and said, what's the matter? What's wrong? And Stanley said, or Owsley Stanley, whatever his name was. He said to him, what you're doing is witchcraft. It's been known forever. The forces that you're playing with, the angels and in the demons realm, the angelic and the demonic realm, has been known forever. And like these techniques are not new. And this is when I really started to put together that MK Ultra was really itself a black magic work, and that it wasn't per se about mind control. I mean, that was part and parcel of the entire package, but I honestly believe, because I think this is still going on, and I think it's going on more widespread than ever, right? What I call MK Ultra 3.0, with all the feeding kids all these prescription drugs, and now all the hormones and all the trans stuff. They're basically preparing people to become vessels for entity possession. And I've been saying this for a while, and this is something I kind of put together when I was. But the aha moment was that passage in that article when he's saying he's talking about the acid test, and he's like, this is black magic. This is witchcraft. This isn't entertainment, and it certainly wasn't science. And then I went back and I read a lot of the papers of scientists reporting on like the things that Ewan Cameron was doing. And they're all like, this had absolutely no scientific value whatsoever. But all those techniques have been known for a very long time, sensory deprivation, ordeal, drugs, the patterning with the tapes, it's basically mantras, right? I mean, they basically were playing like the same phrase or sentence or even word on a tape loop thousands of times. That's a mantra. You see what I'm saying? So it's like all the techniques that were quote unquote scientific to achieve quote unquote mind control are actually sorcerous. It's all sorcery.
Well,
it's all demonic sorcery.
In the interviews that I did with Peter Levenda back in the day, we talked to him several times about his Sinister Forces trilogy. And it struck me that what he was describing in all of this dissection of the work of guys like Cameron and Gottlieb and the MK Ultra type stuff was to try to create demonically possessed Manchurian candidates.
Exactly. I mean, what we're seeing, it's funny because, I've been listening to you for forever. And I think I even said this to you before. It's like Russ Disdar's Black Awakening is now. I mean, it's mainstream. It's gone live.
What was really bizarre to me was that before I'd ever heard of Russ Disdar, I started writing the novel The God Conspiracy, which we republished about a year and a half ago when it became a lot more relevant than it had been when we first released it back in 2006. But I didn't hear of Russ and his work until I heard him on Visigoth's program from the Grassy Knoll back in 2005 and thought, okay, this is pretty sensational, but he sounds intelligent. He sounds like he really is talking about, and it didn't dawn on me until later that I had sort of described in my novel, before I'd heard of Russ and the Black Awakening, I sort of described the Black Awakening. Not that I'm crediting myself with any intuition or insight. Sharon's a lot more spiritually sensitive to things unseen than I am. But
give yourself a little more credit.
I don't know. It just seemed like an obvious thing. If you're going to create mass panic and chaos, that's a good way to do it. Just, random acts of violence all breaking loose at once. But if we take Leviathan or chaos as an entity, which I have come to do over the intervening years, it seems to make sense. And if we understand
what Crowley called Karanzan, right? Aleister Crowley called that spirit that you're referring to, the spirit of Leviathan.
Right. Who shows up in all sorts of ancient pantheons from Mesopotamia to the Norse. It still has some influence over what's going on in the world today, just like, this Baal, Haman, Molech, Enlil, Saturn, Kronos, whatever you want to call them. Just, like a mob boss or a gangbanger who's in prison, he's still got minions who can influence things on the streets. And it's manifesting in these things that are popping up around us. You mentioned that the trans movement is an element of this, and this is something that just makes me really thankful that our daughter is in her 30s now. That she's not going through school right now in a public school setting, because even here in the Ozarks, in the little towns around us, the town just south of us, the county seat's got 440 people. The town where we bank and do our grocery shopping's got 1,400. And even there, because of Title IX, the Department of Education at the federal level uses Title IX to intimidate schools in places where you wouldn't expect to see this agenda. Because folks here in the Ozarks are really, really conservative.
Yeah, well, it's for lack of a better term, it's a form of spiritual warfare. And they seem to be really concentrating with like the drag shows and all the rest of it in these conservative areas. It's basically, it's like insurrection. It's a kind of a form of insurrection.
Yeah.
Because again, it's using the cover of woke. But about Inanna and Ishtar. I mean, all her priests were, for lack of a better term, trans, weren't they? I mean, they were eunuchs and
cross-dressers, but also eunuchs, and this extended into the worship of Cybele,
Kadesh, Sibili,
right.
Kadesh, Astarte.
Mm-hmm.
It's all just basically culturally focused incarnations of the same goddess, right?
Right.
But it's from my readings, and it's kind of thing we kind of have to read between the line. I think all the priestesses, the priestess class, certainly in Mesopotamia and probably in like Syria and the Levant and so on, were all trans. When I think about the cultural environment and how women were just basically seen as property, right? I can't imagine that you would trust, your state worship to your property, if you understand what I'm saying. And then the fact, in the Bible, throughout, the translation has been handed down to us as sodomite, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the Hebrew term is Kadesh, and Kadesh were the temple prostitute,
right.
Male temple prostitute priests of all these this family of goddesses,
mm-hmm.
and of which the goddess Kadesh or Katesh, as we see show up in Egypt more formally, but had come to Egypt from
Canaan.
From Canaan, exactly. It's being revived. It's being revived. And this is what I'm saying. It's like the old state cults, worked for the elite class for thousands of years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Christianity put a stop to a lot of these practices that favored this elite class, and we're seeing like what I would call a revanchist crusade on the part of, and I think these cults have morphed. I don't think they're exactly the same as they were 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. But I think in essence, it's the same phenomenon. You understand what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And when I talk about the Watchers, recently on my Patreon, I did this whole presentation on the Space Brother phenomenon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Space Brothers are just basically incarnations of the Watchers, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But they're also, all these Space Brother cults are incredibly authoritarian. You know what I mean? Like almost totalitarian. And all these Space Brothers cults always had the same message, like, diminishing Jesus, or just basically Judaism or Christianity, or just basically that whole family of religions, right? So they're always diminished. It's like, oh, you don't understand what they're really saying. It's really all about this, right? But at the same time, it's like introducing, the replacement is the Space Brothers, aka the Watchers, right? But it's all just incredibly cruel and authoritarian mindset that comes with it. And I trace this back to Bailey, Alice Bailey,
mm-hmm.
who was very explicit in her watcher worship. I mean, she I don't know if we discussed this, but Alice Bailey in her early book said the Watchers were the good guys. So
mm-hmm.
the Watchers basically sacrificed themselves. They were the sacrificial ones who were following God's orders. So God wanted the Watcher angels to come down and bring this knowledge or consciousness or awareness to humanity. And the Watchers volunteered, right? They were the good guys. They were the sacrificial ones. And now they're waiting. They were imprisoned. There was this whole misunderstanding, this whole mix-up, right?
Mm-hmm,
so,
mm-hmm.
like, the host of heaven, Michael, Uriel, Gabriel, so on and so forth, defeat the Watchers and condemn them to Tartarus. But this is all going to be reversed, and this is explicit in Bailey. This is not like interpretive. Like, I'm not telling you like how I see it, right? Like, oh, it's kind of like this. It's like she says this just straight up. They were the good guys. They were acting on orders of God, and they will be released. And we'll have paradise on earth. And of course, paradise on earth with 7/8 of the population being exterminated. And, Alice Bailey was like, the atom bomb was God's gift because now we can just get rid of all the useless eaters and so on. It's just astonishing how explicit it was. And one thing that I discussed with you, and I sent you that presentation I'd done, I showed you the slides, is how much of this ends up in Lovecraft. So Lovecraft, I wrote this 11 years ago now. I wrote this post on the Secret Sun and just showing how the Cthulhu mythos with the old ones and the deep ones, all these this ones and that ones, it's all taken from Bailey, but it's all the Watchers, right? Because it's like, so the Watchers are, in some tellings are in Tartarus and some tellings are in the Abyss, right? And what do we see in the Cthulhu mythos? It's like, the great old ones are all biding their time, dead but dreaming.
Right.
In the depths, right? And it's the Watchers. And the thing that really struck me, so Peter, you mentioned Peter Levenda, and he was talking about how this all must be true because Crowley was sort of picking up on the same thing as Lovecraft. It's like, yeah, because they're all taking their orders from the same British intelligence handlers, in my estimation. I mean, how does this show up? So we have Bailey, who, a frog could tell that she was British intelligence up and down the line. And of course, I mean, there's no mystery with Crowley. How are they telling these same stories just in different versions? And then it's showing up with Lovecraft, who was, friends, quote unquote, friends with E. Hoffman Price, who was like blatantly Army intelligence, right? I mean, he was in the Expeditionary Force and worked for Union Carbide with this, just basically no-show job. And it's all Watcher mythology, but it sort of takes these different forms, right?
Right.
But it's all the same thing. And then what we see more recently is all these sort of like super race things, sort of working from the X-Men model, things like, The Gifted and Sense8, and even things like Harry Potter. So it's like all these sort of like, a race apart, the new breed, the new humanity, and it's all sort of emanations of the same mythos, just updated for modern audiences. But if you trace it all back to Alice Bailey, and then you read her early books like Initiation, Human and Soul, and Coming of Cosmic Fire, and so on, she does not beat around the bush. She's like, the Watchers were the good guys, and they're waiting, for the conditions to be right where they'll take over again, So.
And then the Lucis Trust winds up with offices right next to the United Nations and in
Wall Street,
in Whitehall.
Wall Street, yeah. So the Lucis Trust, their original headquarters is right next to GCHQ in London.
Right.
And then their offices in New York are at 120 Wall Street, which, if you look at that building, it's clearly modeled on Entemenaki, which was the model for the Tower of Babel. Right? It's
oh yeah.
In any case, it's like it's basically in a Sumerian ziggurat style.
Right.
And it's just like, gee, how did that happen? And then how do people like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and all these big corporations and banks and stuff, why are they sending this silly little, on the face of it, this silly little cult made up almost entirely of little old ladies? Like, why are they just pumping them full of money? And my argument is that they're setting up an infrastructure, for this cult, for the Watcher cult. And like I said, I mean, it's just, people think, oh, this guy's just making leaps all over the place. Just go back and read her books. She does not hide her agenda in any way, shape, or form. So
it's really astonishing that the church is so blind to this, because it's so in their face. I think the response from most American Christians, anyway, is that well, this stuff's all made up, so there's no harm to it, because these gods, these entities don't even exist. Survey after survey by groups like George Barna who's now at Arizona Christian University. 60% of American Christians don't believe that Satan's a literal entity, it's just a concept to represent evil. So these, what's the harm?
Well, I'll tell you how this all ties together for me. Are you familiar with Carl Raschke?
I should be. The name is ringing a bell, but
okay. Carl Raschke is a theologian and professor, and he's written a number of books on like Christian theology and stuff. But he wrote a book, or he wrote a paper on ultra terrestrials, and he was talking about like, how when you get past all the nonsense and the science fiction and the sensationalism, how the UFO phenomenon is actually working. And what he said, that, like, again, this was another light going off moment for me. He said that, he's speculating what the goals of these, what he called ultra-terrestrial beings would be. And he said the goal would be like, they want to bring us into their realm or enter into our realm. And when I heard that, I'm like, oh, DMT, the DMT trials, the machine elves, all these entities, you hear this over and over again from these people who undergo these experiments, where they meet these beings that he calls ultra terrestrials. And, I would, based on several thousand years of history, would call demons. I'm sure you would as well. Mm-hmm. Maybe not so much in like the Hollywood Grand Guignol tradition, but the tradition that like Augustine talks about in City of God. But to me, I think they're all deceiving spirits. Mm-hmm. They just have their own agenda, and I don't think they think too much of us at all. And it really frightens me, like I said, that we see this MK Ultra 3.0, where they want to test people with depression with ketamine and DMT and all these like very, very heavy, high doses of serious hallucinogens. That again, when I talked about what Owsley Stanley said at the acid test, he said this is witchcraft. Mm-hmm. And that's how I just come to see it all. I really believe that, that science is the plumbing. Science and technology is just basically the plumbing. And that the world, in fact, runs on sorcery. That sorcery rules the world that we live in, not science. Science is just basically a means to an end. If that makes sense.
Why isn't it more in our face? For example, there was an event just over a year ago, that Travis Scott Astroworld concert where 10 people died. And it was pretty clear when you saw the imagery there that, boy, that stage looks like the entryway into hell. And when you start digging into what the other imagery that he was publicizing for this tour, it's pretty clear that's what he was trying to evoke. But that's
the Watchers, though. I've done. He did a video where he depicted himself as like Nephilim, Anakim, Rephaim, as a giant, who is backed by this giant orb with this giant eyeball. So it's all, I did a lot of that because so everybody's saying this is satanic, and it's like, well, yeah, small s satanic, but what it really is that it's Watcher worship, and the stage with the mountains, it's Mount Tremont.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there's like this sort of vortex entrance. And then you see the T-shirts with like the figures coming, walking through the door and everything. That's pretty in your face as far as I'm concerned, because I went back and then I looked at some of the other imagery from previous Astroworld concerts. And it's just, to me, it just seems to be like straight up Watcher worship. And, Watchers and Nephilim,
Mm-hmm. But critics or those who are trying to, provide cover so that the most people just still stay asleep and say, well, he's just an entertainer. He's trying to, get a reaction. It's just, it's art. It doesn't really mean anything. But when we start seeing things like coming back around to this now statue on the New York appellate courthouse in Manhattan.
And you didn't mention that it was part of like the now statue, and then the other statue, which is called Witness.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, Witness.
Right?
Watcher. Yeah.
But the two statues together are called Heva, which is, I guess it's Pakistani or something for Eve.
It's very close to the Hebrew.
Yes, and to me, when I hear that, all I think of is Lilith. Who in certain Talmudic texts and so on was called the first Eve. So Lilith was like the first Eve, and that's. But like the Witness, how much, and it's gigantic too. It's like this big giant in the middle of the park called Witness. How much more blatant does it have to be?
One of the things that really blew our minds when we were researching our book, which really dealt with the cult of the Rephaim in the ancient world and how it influenced the Bible, is finding out that the Hebrew word for cities, Irim, is identical to the Aramaic word, which is a very similar language, the Aramaic word for watchers. So the watchers in Daniel chapter 4, the faithful watchers who come down and decree the punishment to Nebuchadnezzar for his pride, by decree of the watchers. And by the way, the word of that goddess, Kadesh, is very similar to the Hebrew word for Holy One, Kadesh.
Well, sacred
essentially what it means, right.
Yeah.
But
those are the temple prostitutes,
right,
that you read about all throughout the Bible, Old Testament.
But there are a couple of verses in the Old Testament where it appears that the word cities is used when watchers is probably a better fit, like in Isaiah 14, which is that famous chapter that in the King James reads, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" Verse 19 reads, "But you are cast out away from your grave like a loathed branch," and that's actually a loanword from Egyptian. Netzir, which means dead god. It's used to describe Osiris, usually. So like a loathed dead god, clothed with the slain, those pierced by the sword who go down to the stones of the pit like a dead body trampled underfoot. And then verse 21, "May the offspring of evildoers nevermore be named. Prepare slaughter for his sons because of the guilt of their fathers, lest they rise and possess the earth and fill the face of the world with Irim, with cities, or with watchers." And there's another verse in Numbers chapter 24, which is the prophecy of Balaam, the prophet who was supposed to curse Israel, and he blessed them instead, where, the star shall rise from Jacob, and he basically will destroy the survivors of cities, or of the watchers.
Well, maybe there's just a very close connection between the two, because when you talk about the cult of the giants, the first thing that comes to my mind, and you probably know this, is that all the Sumerian kings were called Lugal, right?
Right, big man.
They were like, Lugals, whoever, and Lugal means giant.
Big man, yeah.
So I don't know if that was, just some term that was hereditary, but to me, I think that what that indicates, particularly since the Lugals, like so you're talking about the cities, were all connected to, they were all lords of city-states, Ur and so on and so forth. To me, what that says is that there was a very close connection between giants and cities. So to me, that sort of backs up your interpretation of Isaiah.
And what's even more interesting is that these giants, the Nephilim, were created by the the Hebrew watchers. A scholar by the name of Omar Anus showed this in a paper about 15 years ago now, that they were the Mesopotamian Apkallu.
Apkallu, that's right.
And in Akkadian, that would be, Apkallu is the Akkadian. In Sumerian, it'd be Abgalu, which means big man from water, because they come from the Abzu, the abyss.
Yeah, well, see, this is what I'm talking about. So I don't know if you watched any of the World Cup.
No.
So the World Cup was in Qatar, right? Mm-hmm. And Qatar, of course, is just right across the little bay there from Dubai. Mm-hmm. And the thing, so, this whole, I don't know, call it awakening, but just like starting to notice how in your face the symbolism can get. Back in 2008, not long after Obama's election, they opened the Atlantis Hotel and casino in Dubai, and they had this whole. I mean, it must have cost hundreds of millions of dollars. This whole celebration for it, and it was lorded over by this priestess who looked like she was dressed, like a priestess of Dagon. It was like, it was almost like a mermaid or something. And and then they have like the sons of Horus come in. It was just like, wait a minute, I thought this was like a Muslim theocracy. It's like, yeah. But the point is that I saw a lot of the same imagery, and I blogged about this as well with the World Cup, because they had this this quote unquote mascot, right? Mm-hmm. And it was it took this, I guess, this Moroccan pop star in this video. The mascot comes from this other world, this parallel dimension. They go through this vortex into this other world. And it's like the mascot is saying, you didn't understand, we've been trying to reach you. We've been trying to communicate with you for thousands of years. And you thought we were like Bigfoot or UFOs or ghosts or whatever. But, and I'm just sitting there going, this is it, man. This is like the same symbolism. Like I said, you just see all these different culturally specific versions of it, but it all boils down, in my estimation, to the Watchers, which, in the context of what Rashke was talking about, is like these ultra-terrestrial beings that want to be here. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, they want somehow to interact with us. And my feeling would be is that they want to possess us. They want to use us as their vessels. You know what I'm saying? And you were talking about the X-Files before. I mean, like the black oil and so on.
Right.
What is it? The black oil comes up from the ground and it possesses people, and it recreates them in its image. Mm-hmm. So,
there's a hint that this is sort of the end game. In the prophecy of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39, God concludes that by saying, okay, this is what's going to happen at the end. Let me bring up the verse here so I'm not trying to remember it. I'm at an age where that doesn't work as well as it used to. On that day, I will give to Gog, which is the Old Testament Jewish concept of the Antichrist, the great end times enemy of Yahweh. I will give to Gog a place for burial in Israel, the valley of the travelers, east of the sea. In Hebrew, that's Avarim. It will block the travelers, for there Gog and all his multitude will be buried. The word travelers is a term that was used by the Canaanites for the Rephaim. So, and interestingly, when Moses was told to climb Mount Nebo, we can kind of identify where this is, because in Deuteronomy, where God says to Moses, okay, climb this mountain and get your only look at the promised land, it's called this mountain of Avarim, this mountain of the travelers. And, literally, Rephaim texts, the Rephaim texts from the ancient kingdom of Ugarit from about the time of the Judges, 200 years after Moses, call the Rephaim travelers because they travel, apparently, or cross over. And they're summoned to the threshing floor of El, which was their version of Saturn, Kronos, Baal Haman, Enlil, Dagon, Molech, which would be the summit of Mount Hermon. And in this text, it literally says they mount their chariots, they travel first one day and then another, and then they arrive at dawn of the third day, which for Christians should send the hair on your back of your neck standing up, where the blessing of the name of El will revivify or resurrect the heroes. When you consider that these were the inspiration, the Rephaim, and again, going back to that scholar Amar Anus, for the Greek heroes, the demigods like Heracles and Perseus, he showed that the term used by Homer and Hesiod for the men of the golden age when Kronos ruled in heaven, Meropes anthropoi, translated usually into English as mortal men, but that word Meropes derives from the same Semitic root as Rephaim. So this hero worship of the ancestors is very old, and it derives from their progenitors, the Watchers and Mount Hermon.
Mm-hmm.
And if we credit, maybe I'm reading too much into Ezekiel and the war of Gog and Magog, but if these travelers are part of this war, these vessels for these spirits could make up the army of the Antichrist at the final battle of Armageddon.
Well, see, that's getting into what I was saying with MK Ultra, and then kind of connecting that to what Russ Dizdar talked about with the Black Awakening.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting too, because, when you talk about these various races of giants, so the Anakim were based in Hebron, right?
They were in the high country, the highlands of Judah and Israel, according to Joshua, I think 21, I'm thinking, or maybe 12. I'd have to go back and look. Anyway, where they summarize the conquest of Canaan, it emphasized the fact that Joshua and the Israelites wiped out the Anakim from the whole land, except for Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod, the Philistine cities, which, of course, is where Goliath and his buddies came from later.
Well, which one of these peoples were based in Hebron?
The Amorites. It's where Abraham was friends with a couple of Amorites who helped him chase after Lot and their abductors.
All right, I would have to look this up, because I had done this thing about, connecting the Betty and Barney Hill thing to when Aleister Crowley spent a summer in New Hampshire at as the guest of Josephine Adams, who was a descendant of John Adams. She was a famous, it's Evangeline Adams. She was a famous astrologer at the time. And he had these experiences with like ball lightning and stuff. But this was about 40 miles down the highway from Indian Head, where, Betty and Barney Hill had claimed to be abducted.
Mm-hmm.
And then they, when they came back, when they woke up, they were driving through Hebron, where Crowley had summered. And then, of course, a few years ago, this just makes me laugh. Ghislaine Maxwell was a little further down the highway when they arrested her on World UFO Day. And of course, her sister was married to the son of Jack Parsons' partner at JPL, one big happy family, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But, it sounds so tortured and scattered, and a lot of people just think like, what's going on here? What are these guys talking about? But basically, what it really all boils down to, and like I said, I go through great lengths to walk people through all this, because it does get very overwhelming.
And you were right, by the way. I was forgetting Numbers 13:22, where the descendants of Anak were the residents of Hebron at the time of the conquest. So, yeah, Ahaman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak.
Well, see, but that also connects to, the Space Brothers, the tall whites, what they call them, or the Nordics. And that sort of comes from sort of the post-Adamski thing. But basically what it boils down to, just kind of rein this in for, it might be lost. But there is this strange, but increasingly open nexus between esoteric ufology, these what I call these watcher cults, which have very strong basis in the Space Brothers, which ties back to that esoteric ufology again, MK Ultra, and what I call MK Ultra 3.0, which is just basically putting as many school children on as many, mind-altering drugs as they can manage, which has been going on for a number of years now, but it's just accelerating, particularly with the introduction of the puberty blockers and the hormones and so on, which are making children insane and suicidal. But there is, and then the symbolism, like the public symbolism, these public rituals that I've been looking at for a number of years now, where if you really break down the symbolism, it's just really in your face, and like you had mentioned before, it's all sort of cloaked in under the guise of, the rubric of art. This is an art installation, exactly like this statue that we see. in Madison Square. But it's just like, I think a lot of people are just starting to cotton to it, because that statue does not belong on that building in any way, shape, or form. And it has nothing to do with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Even if they did give her a little lace collar, it's a demonic representation of these goddesses, and Lilitu, the demons, and so on. These goddesses of war and lust and so on, that seem to be, the spirit that they want to invoke.
Yes.
In this age.
Absolutely.
It's invocation. So basically, just to boil it down to one word, it's just basically sorcery. It seems like very scattered and haphazard, and it almost seems like that meme from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, with the guy like, it's got all the connections on the walls and stuff. But if you're not familiar with it, it does sound like that. But once you start to really investigate this material and break it down to its core components, you realize that it's just different guises, but the core components are always the same. They're always the same, and they're just repeated ad nauseum. And and now we're in the middle of World War III. We're in the early days of World War III. I mean, the early days of these kind of wars, people don't ever believe that there's actually a war going on.
Right.
I mean, we've seen that throughout history. And
no, I agree with you. I've been saying this for months, that we are stumbling into World War III. Sharon has been researching this because her Red Wing saga is leading up to World War I, and so she's been doing a lot of reading. And she said, this looks a lot like 1913 and 1914. I said, yeah. It's just going to take a trigger. Does. But hopefully cooler heads will prevail before we get there. But whenever things
don't count on it.
No, well, whenever things start getting a little overwhelming, I just turn back to Psalm 2. He who sits in the heavens laughs. He holds them in derision. So the World Economic Forum and the globalists who are pulling these strings right now think that they're winning. But a day is coming where the one who created the universe spoke by speaking into existence is going to say, okay, I warned you, don't make me come down there. But now I'm coming down there.
But here's the thing. So this is another aspect of what I'm talking about. So the World Economic Forum are putting all their meetings online now. Mm-hmm. So it used to be like, it was all secret. Like, these must be like a bunch of Bond villains all meeting in secret and coming up with these. And then you realize it's just a bunch of dorks.
Well, that's it.
A bunch of weirdos, and it's like all their plans with like, eating crickets and so on, and just like all their ideas, are against God's law. They're against nature. That's who they're at war with nature, is really what it is. They're at war with natural law because of ego. And because they all had rich parents, and they're all raised in bubbles, completely separate from the experiences of 99.9% of humanity, they just have no concept. I mean, these people couldn't even tell you how much a gallon of milk costs. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. They're just weirdos, and that's another. This is another thing that people look at that statue and they're just like, "What the hell?" Why don't you just put it? If you want to honor like women in law, so why don't you just put a statue of Ruth Bader Ginsburg up? She's passed away. It's like, why do you have to put this weird demon with like these weird, I don't know, noodles for
serpentine appendages, right?
And like the big ram's horns and so on. Like it looks like Baphomet or something. Mm-hmm. Why do you have to do it that way? Why does it have to be? And I think people are starting to get it. And this is why they're really hammering this whole thing with disinformation and misinformation. Mm-hmm. It's really just a way of silencing dissent, and more importantly, silencing criticism. I mean, these people think that they're above criticism.
Yeah, it is not tolerated.
It's not tolerated, exactly. So, these are very interesting times.
Yeah.
I think the technocrats, let's just call them, are going to lose big time. I mean, even if if you didn't add in all the demonic stuff and the weird cultism and so on, just at the core of these crazy ideas they have, they're not workable. Like smart cities and so on. It's like, where are we going to get all the rare earth metals and so on, and the neon and the freon and all the rest of it to build the machines that they need for this technological nightmare world? Mm-hmm. We're not. And, the issues with the supply chains. So it's like, be of good cheer. Be of good cheer. They're going to lose. The question is going to be like, how much suffering are we all going to experience between today and the inevitable day of the destruction?
Yeah. Well, it begins with knowledge, as the prophet Hosea once wrote, "My people are destroyed for lack of." And Chris has been out there on the front lines trying to decipher these mystic and mystical messages that are being implanted in plain sight on our television screens and our art installations in our cities, and so on. He blogs about it at secretsun.blogspot.com and the Secret Sun Institute of Advanced Synchro Mysticism. Chris, people want to follow your work more directly and support you. How do they do that?
Well, that's my Patreon, and you can find the link at the Secret Sun blog. This week, I'm going to be doing my presentation. I don't know if you ever saw the series, Lucifer's Technologies. It's basically talking about how basically the technological infrastructure for the computer chip revolution and so on really arose in this period of very heavy duty occult mass ritual. Things like Project Diana and Operation Crossroads and the Trinity Test. I mean, there was this whole series of what people call mega rituals that all sorts of starts to culminate in the quote unquote invention of the transistor. Shortly, this is funny how it all connects. Shortly after Aleister Crowley's death, Bell Laboratories comes out with, and of course, Bell Laboratories, their symbol, and their successor company, AT&T. The symbol, of Phanis. You know what I mean? They call it what is it? Genius of electricity, aka the spirit of communication. Mm-hmm. But it's Phanis, who is Lucifer. So it's like literally Lucifer's technologies. And when the thing I pointed out today, when I did this post cataloging all these like hideous demons that they're putting up in all these key installations. St. Louis University, which is a Jesuit-run university of all places, they have what I call Transphanis at the gate, and it's like another one of these kind of statues that anyone would just look at and recognize as being demonic.
I'm gonna have to go visit that when I go up to visit our daughter next time. I'm working on a follow-up novel of The God Conspiracy, and because I spent some time in St. Louis, that's one of the major settings there. There's a big building there that was housed AT&T and then Southwestern Bell, and then it's just sitting empty right now, this 43-story building or whatever. Yeah. That's just empty, but there's an art park right across the street from it with some really creepy statuary, and so that'll...
Oh, I'll have to look that up.
Yeah. And, what is that arch for anyway? We'll have to investigate some of that. I'll put links in the show notes to Chris's blog, Chris's Patreon page, and I think Sharon and I are going to have to start paying closer attention to your work, because it's going to inform what we're doing. We've been coming at it from the ancient text, trying to read the cosmology of the ancient Mesopotamians and how that all fits together. The religion of Greece and Rome and the Canaanites and the Hurrians and. But we're not spending as much time deciphering the symbolism that's right in front of us, and we need to do that more. So, Chris, thanks for taking some time out.
It's the same symbolism, dude.
It's just bringing back the old gods.
All that ancient stuff. It's a piece of cake. It's because it's all right there, right in front of your face.
They're getting the old band back together. The band, Elwood. Yeah, Chris, thanks for your time tonight.
Always a pleasure talking to you, Derek. Thank you. And thank you for all your watchers and listeners for putting up with my lunatic ravings. I hope I didn't come across as being too unhinged.
Check our show notes at VFTB.net or wherever else you are consuming this podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, God bless you. Subscribe, click that little bell for the notifications, but then download our free app, because our app will help you bypass the gatekeepers of big tech. At some point, we're going to say something that will get us banned, canceled, or shadow banned at least. They may even go back, and they've already done that within the last 12 months. They've gone back more than a year and a half and found something they didn't like, which got us a strike on our channel. So rather than worry about everything we say all the time, we just recommend you get the app, because that gets you all of our content. This video program every week, our weekly 30-minute broadcast, Unraveling Revelation, plus our 2 podcasts, our weekly Bible study, the Gilbert House Fellowship, and the podcast that started this whole journey, PID Radio. And as time allows, we're going back and adding in archives going all the way back to 2005. So check out the classic VFTB and PID Radio classic sections of the Gilbert House app, the GHTV app. You'll find a link to the App Store at VFTB.net, or go to our main website, which is gilberthouse.org, and gilberthouse.org/app is where you'll find that link. A couple of things to tell you about, including an exciting update on our trip to Turkey. Now, I'm going to have to get used to saying Turkey, because that is the official name now, according to the United Nations. The Turks want us to pronounce it their way, and it's their country, so well enough. But first, we have got a new project Sharon and I are working on in 2023, and we are asking for your help in this project. It is, we're calling it Build Barn Better. Build Barn Better. The World Economic Forum's got its Build Back Better plan, which has been adopted by everybody from to Joe Biden, Boris Johnson, Justin Trudeau, Pope Francis, of course, the World Economic Forum. But we think the plan is more accurately Build Back Babel. That's for another day. We are calling our plan Build Barn Better. We've got a 1,200 square foot building on our property, a pole barn. It's a metal shop building on a concrete slab. And for the last 8 years, it's essentially just held overflow from the house. And our yard tractor and all the things that we moved up from my mother's house in South Carolina when she retired. We had to move her up here near us, and she had to downsize. So that's all out in the barn right now. Thankfully, and here's the thing. Thankfully, we need more space, because as you can tell, this is a spare bedroom in the house. If you're watching this on video, our Unraveling Revelation comes from another bedroom in the house. PID Radio is in the room directly behind me, and our shipping office for books and DVDs is across the hall that way, which means that when we have visitors, they sleep on the couch out there. We would like to reclaim our house. So we've got a 1,200 square foot building. It's got power in it already. We just need to insulate it and run the power all the way around, add HVAC. We think we can do that for under $15,000 altogether, which is cheap compared to what we'd have to spend if we were buying a building or building from scratch. So we are blessed in that we've already got the facility. We just need to bring it up to speed so that we can use it year round. And to be quite honest, it would also get me out of the house for a while, so that would give Sharon some hours during the day when we're not here talking to each other, so that she can focus and write. Love working from home, love being around my wife all the time, and that is truly a blessing to be married to and working with your best friend. But it's difficult to write when there's somebody that you want to talk to sitting on the other side of the room. So if I can work out there during the day doing our video editing and whatnot, and she's got time in here to write, that would be truly a blessing. So if you are so led, of course, your prayers are the most important thing to us. But if you are so led, you can find a place at the website, VFTB.net or gilberthouse.org. You'll find a link that's in the right-hand column there, or gilberthouse.org/donate. And we appreciate your help. Our first year in ministry has just been God proving that when you step out in faith and it's His direction, that things will happen. So again, thank you. Coming up, we've got, of course, the Israel tour. That ship has probably sailed, but if you're interested, you can still get in touch with Lipkin Tours to find out, because we kick off the tour on March 19th. So it's just about 6 weeks out now. But other than that, our next tour, and we've got dates now confirmed of a tour of Turkey, Turkey, October 18th through November 3rd. We had talked about a tour last year, you might remember. Put it off because of concerns about security with the Russia-Ukraine war going on. But we talked to the tour company, whom we trust, and they say that 2022, despite what was happening on the other side of the Black Sea, was a record year for tourism in Turkey. And in fact, many Ukrainians and Russians moving to get away from the fighting are relocating to Turkey because it's safe. So, October 18th through November 3rd, we've got some information on the website right now. We're still finalizing who all is coming with us, but for sure, we've got our good friends, Dr. Judd Burton and Dr. Aaron Judkins joining us. And because they've been working on research for a book about the influence of the Watchers on Göbekli Tepe, having them with us when we visit Göbekli Tepe seemed like a really good idea. So, October 18th through November 3rd of 2023, and right now you can find out just the basics at gilberthouse.org/travel, and more information will be coming from the tour company as soon as everything is together. But this is a bucket list type thing, because the places on this tour, Çatalhöyük, Göbekli Tepe, of course, Abraham's hometown of Haran, Şanlıurfa, which may be Ur of the Chaldees, from which Abraham moved to Haran, and a site called Arslan Tepe, which is the northernmost outpost of the kingdom of Nimrod, the ancient city-state of Uruk. So we're going places besides the sites of the seven churches of Revelation and the Plutonion, the gates of hell. So if you're interested in joining us, gilberthouse.org/travel. Find us on social media, all the usual places. I'll put that all over. I forget which side of the screen this comes in on. Anyway, it's on one of these sides of the screen. You'll see all the places you can follow us on social media. Our announcer is DC Good, and A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.